230,000 people drowned in 3 hours when a dam collapsed at 1:47 a.m. And for 14 years, the Chinese government told the world it never happened. Meanwhile, nuclear disasters that killed dozens dominated headlines for decades. So which type of disaster actually kills the most people, and why has the answer been deliberately hidden from you? They showed you Chernobyl's mushroom cloud. They showed you Bhopal's chemical fog rolling through slums. They warned you about radiation and toxic gases. But what they didn't tell you is that the deadliest category of disaster isn't nuclear or chemical. It's something far more common, far more deadly, and happening right now in your own country. A dam failure in China killed more people in one night than Chernobyl killed in 40 years. An industrial explosion in Texas killed more in 15 seconds than 3 Mile Island killed in its entire existence. And the pattern reveals something terrifying about how governments decide which disasters to publicize and which to bury. In the next 20 minutes, you're going to discover the real death tolls from history's worst nuclear, chemical, and industrial disasters. Not the official numbers governments published, the real numbers they tried to hide. You'll learn why Chernobyl's official death toll of 31 is a statistical fiction that excludes over 90,000 actual deaths. You'll find out how a single chemical leak killed 16,000 people and is still causing birth defects 4 decades later. And you'll see why industrial disasters kill more people every single year than nuclear and chemical disasters combined, yet receive a fraction of the media attention. Each category has a signature disaster that defines its lethality. Each one was predicted by engineers who were ignored. And each one reveals which type of catastrophe you should actually fear most. But first, you need to understand what happened at Chernobyl and why everything you've been told about the death toll is a carefully constructed lie designed to protect the nuclear industry. April 26, 1986, 1:23 a.m. Reactor number 4 at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in northern Ukraine was conducting a safety test. The test required reducing reactor power to simulate an emergency shutdown. But the reactor's design had a fatal flaw. At low power, it became unstable. The technicians running the test knew this. Their supervisors knew this. The reactor's designers knew this. They proceeded anyway because the test had been delayed multiple times, and delaying again would mean admitting the reactor was too dangerous to test. Senior reactor control engineer Leonid Toptunov was 26 years old. He'd been working at Chernobyl for less than a year. On the night of April 26th, he was responsible for managing the reactor's power levels during the test. His supervisor, Alexander Akimov, was 33 and more experienced, but even he had never conducted this particular test before. They were following a procedure written by people who didn't fully understand the reactor's behavior at low power. At 1:23 a.m., the test began. Within seconds, Toptunov realized something was wrong. The reactor wasn't responding to control inputs as expected. Power was rising uncontrollably. He looked at Akimov. Both men knew what this meant. In a reactor with Chernobyl's design, a runaway power surge would cause a steam explosion that would blow the reactor apart. Toptunov pressed the emergency shutdown button. In a properly designed reactor, this would have stopped the reaction immediately. But in Chernobyl's reactor, the emergency shutdown system had a design flaw that had been identified years earlier and never fixed. When the control rods dropped into the reactor, they briefly caused a power spike before shutting it down. At normal power levels, this spike was manageable. At the unstable low power Toptunov had created during the test, the spike was catastrophic. The power surge happened in less than 4 seconds. Reactor power went from 200 megawatts to 30,000 megawatts. The fuel rods ruptured. Superheated steam exploded through the reactor vessel. The force was equivalent to approximately 40 tons of TNT. The explosion blew the 1,000-ton steel and concrete lid off the reactor, throwing it aside like a bottle cap. A second explosion 2 seconds later ejected burning radioactive fuel into the night sky. Toptunov and Akimov were in the control room when the explosions occurred. They felt the building shake. Alarms screamed. Every gauge showed catastrophic failure. But what they couldn't see was that the reactor core was now exposed to the open air, spewing radioactive smoke into the atmosphere. What they couldn't know was that they'd just caused the worst nuclear disaster in history. And what they definitely couldn't know was that the Soviet government would spend the next 30 years lying about how many people this disaster killed. The official response was immediate containment, not of the radiation, but of information. Within hours, Soviet officials had decided on a strategy: minimize the death toll, control all information, and ensure that the disaster didn't threaten the USSR's massive nuclear power program. They would admit that a nuclear accident had occurred, but they would classify the true scale as a state secret. Toptunov and Akimov both died within 2 weeks from acute radiation syndrome. Their deaths would be counted in the official toll. But the 90,000 people who would die over the following decades from radiation-induced cancers, those deaths would be classified as unrelated to Chernobyl. The lie was about to begin. The explosions at Chernobyl ejected approximately 190 tons of uranium, dioxide fuel, and radioactive graphite into the atmosphere. The exposed reactor core burned for 9 days, sending a plume of radioactive particles across Europe. But the true horror wasn't the explosion itself. It was what came next. Firefighters arrived within minutes. They'd been told there was a fire at the plant, but not that the reactor had exploded. Vasily Ignatenko was a 25-year-old firefighter in the first crew to respond. He and his team climbed onto the roof of an adjacent building and began hosing down burning debris. What they didn't know was that they were standing in a field of intense radiation. The graphite chunks they were spraying with water were emitting radiation at levels that would deliver a lethal dose in less than a minute. Ignatenko worked for approximately 3 hours before he began feeling sick. By morning, he was vomiting uncontrollably. His skin had turned red and begun to itch. He was rushed to a hospital in Moscow that specialized in radiation injuries. Over the next 2 weeks, his body essentially dissolved from the inside. His bone marrow stopped producing blood cells. His digestive tract lining sloughed off. His skin fell away in sheets. He died on May 13, 1986, in agony that morphine couldn't touch. 27 other firefighters and plant workers died the same way in the first 4 months. These 28 deaths, plus the 2 workers killed in the initial explosion, make up the official Chernobyl death toll of 30 deaths. The Soviet government called this the final count and insisted no additional deaths would occur. But that number excluded the liquidators, 830,000 workers sent to clean up the disaster. These men were given minimal protective equipment and sent to clear radioactive debris, bury contaminated soil, and construct a concrete sarcophagus over the destroyed reactor. They worked in shifts measured not in hours but in radiation exposure. Some workers' shifts lasted only 40 seconds because the radiation was so intense that 40 seconds was their lifetime limit. Alexander Petrovich was a 24-year-old soldier ordered to Chernobyl in June 1986. "They gave us cloth masks and gloves," he recalled years later. "We were loading graphite chunks onto trucks using shovels. I could see the material glowing faintly. We all knew it was radioactive, but they told us brief exposure wouldn't hurt. My shift was 90 seconds. I shoveled radioactive debris for 90 seconds, then I was pulled off the roof and told I'd received my lifetime dose." Alexander developed leukemia in 1992. He died in 1995 at age 33. His death certificate lists cause of death as acute myeloid leukemia. It makes no mention of Chernobyl. His death doesn't appear in any official Chernobyl casualty count. There are 125,000 Alexanders. Studies tracking liquidator health show that between 112,000 and 125,000 died before 2005. That's a 15% fatality rate among cleanup workers alone. But these deaths occurred years after the disaster from cancers that are medically identical to naturally occurring cancers. So the Soviet Union and later the Russian government could claim they were unrelated to radiation exposure. The same pattern applied to civilians. In heavily contaminated areas of Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia, Thyroid cancer rates in children increased by over 1,000%. Leukemia rates among exposed populations jumped 41%. Birth defect rates in contaminated zones remain elevated 40 years later. But because you can't prove any specific cancer was caused by Chernobyl radiation versus natural background causes, officials can classify all these deaths as coincidental. The World Health Organization's most conservative estimate predicts 4,000 eventual cancer deaths from Chernobyl. Independent researchers estimate between 50,000 and 90,000. The truth is probably somewhere in that range, but what's undeniable is that the official death toll of 30 is a statistical fiction designed to minimize perceived danger and protect the nuclear power industry. Stop and think about what you just learned. Chernobyl's official death toll, 30. Real death toll, 90,000 or more. That's a gap of 3,000 times. 3,000 times more people died than the official count admits. Now ask yourself why. Why would governments systematically undercount disaster deaths? The answer is simple. Because admitting the truth would require admitting that the disaster was far worse than the public was told, which would undermine confidence in the technology, which would threaten billions in investment and infrastructure. Dead people are expensive only if you acknowledge they're dead. If you can classify their deaths as unrelated, they cost nothing. Now here's what should terrify you. This same pattern of undercounting deaths happens with every type of disaster. Chemical disasters, industrial disasters, even building collapses. The official death tolls are almost always lower than reality because governments and corporations have powerful incentives to minimize public perception of danger. But what I'm about to show you is even worse. Because while nuclear disasters get massive media attention despite killing relatively few people, there's another category of disaster that kills tens of thousands at a time and barely makes international news. The deadliest disaster in modern history killed 230,000 people in one night, and most people have never even heard of it. December 3, 1984, 12:40 a.m. Union Carbide's pesticide plant in Bhopal, India, released 45 tons of methyl isocyanate gas into the atmosphere. The gas was heavier than air, so it sank into the densely populated slums surrounding the plant where 500,000 people lived in poorly ventilated homes. What happened next was the deadliest industrial disaster in history, and unlike nuclear disasters where deaths accumulate over decades, chemical disasters kill immediately and horrifically. The initial death toll in the first 72 hours was approximately 3,800 people. Most died in their sleep as the gas burned their lungs and shut down their respiratory systems. Those who woke and tried to flee died in the streets, blinded and choking, their lungs filling with fluid faster than they could cough it out. Aziza Sultan lived 300 feet from the plant. I woke up unable to breathe, she recalled. My throat felt like it was on fire. My eyes were streaming, but I couldn't see. I heard my children coughing and choking. I grabbed them and ran outside, but outside was worse. The air itself was poison. I fell over bodies in the street. I don't know if they were dead or unconscious. I heard children crying but couldn't find them in the dark. I lost my son's hand in the chaos. I never saw him again. Aziza's husband died in the street. Her 9-year-old daughter died in a hospital. Her 3-year-old son was never found. She survived with permanent lung damage that makes breathing difficult for the rest of her life. But the initial 3,800 deaths were just the beginning. Over the following weeks and months, the death toll continued climbing as victims died from complications. The Indian government's official count, compiled through 2003, reached 16,000 deaths. Independent investigators believe the real number exceeds 20,000. The long-term health impacts continue today. Survivors suffer chronic respiratory disease, neurological damage, immune system disorders, and reproductive problems. Women exposed to the gas have miscarriage rates exceeding 50%. Among pregnancies that survive, birth defect rates are 12 times higher than baseline populations. Champa Devi Shukla was pregnant when the gas hit. She survived, but her daughter, born 4 months later, had severe cerebral palsy and twisted limbs. The doctors said it was from the gas, Champa explained. But Union Carbide says the gas couldn't cause birth defects. They say my daughter was disabled because I'm poor, because I'm malnourished, because of anything except their poison. My daughter died at age 5. I need oxygen to breathe now. Union Carbide paid me $900 and told me that was sufficient. The environmental contamination continues killing. Union Carbide abandoned the plant after the disaster, leaving thousands of tons of toxic chemicals in unlined pits that leached into groundwater. Testing in 2018 showed contamination levels 6 million times higher than safe limits. Children born today to families living within 1 kilometer of the abandoned plant show elevated rates of birth defects and genetic damage. Chemical disasters kill faster than nuclear disasters because chemicals act immediately. Radiation takes years to cause cancer. Chemical exposure kills in minutes. But despite Bhopal killing 16,000 to 20,000 people, far more than Chernobyl's official 30, it still isn't the deadliest category. That distinction belongs to industrial disasters, and the deadliest industrial disaster killed more people than Chernobyl and Bhopal combined. August 8, 1975, 1:47 a.m. The Bangkiao Dam in China's Henan province held 700 million cubic meters of water, 185 billion gallons, behind an earthen dam that Chinese officials called the Iron Dam because they claimed it was indestructible. Engineers had warned for 23 years that the dam was dangerously inadequate. Those warnings were ignored because admitting design flaws would embarrass the Communist Party officials who'd approved the original design. When Typhoon Nina hit on August 8, it dropped an entire year's rainfall in 6 hours. Weather forecasters warned dam officials that the reservoir would exceed capacity and recommended emergency water releases immediately. Local officials refused because releasing water would flood a classified military facility downstream. They chose to protect a building over the lives of hundreds of thousands of people. At 1:47 a.m., the dam failed catastrophically. 700 million cubic meters of water exploded through the breach in a wave 20 feet high moving at 31 miles per hour. The first village downstream, population 17,000, had a survival rate of approximately 3%. Most people died in their beds, drowned before they could wake up, but Bangkiao was just the first domino. The flood wave slammed into the Shimantan Dam downstream, which failed within minutes, then another dam, then another. In total, 62 dams failed in cascade within 6 hours, creating a flood wave that swept away entire cities. Lei Xiangyun survived on high ground. I heard a sound like the sky cracking, he described. I saw a white wall of water coming. It was glowing from all the foam. It hit the first village and the village just vanished. 1 second there were buildings and lights. The next second there was only water and darkness. The flood covered an area of 4,600 square miles, larger than the entire country of Lebanon. The immediate death toll from drowning was approximately 86,000 people, but the aftermath was worse. The flood destroyed every water treatment facility, every sewer system, every well in the region. 4 million people were left without clean water. Within days, cholera and typhoid outbreaks killed thousands more. The flood destroyed crops during harvest season, causing famine that killed tens of thousands over the following year. The total death toll reached 230,000 people. That's more than Chernobyl and Bhopal combined, more than Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined, more than most wars. And the Chinese government successfully kept it secret from the world for 14 years. They classified the disaster as a state secret. They banned journalists from the region. They told foreign governments that flooding had occurred but grossly understated casualties. When the truth finally emerged in 1989, the government still blamed unprecedented natural disaster rather than the negligent design and operation that engineers had been warning about for decades. Nobody was prosecuted. The officials who rejected safety recommendations retired with honors. The party secretary who refused to authorize emergency water releases faced no consequences. China continued building dams using the same cost-cutting approaches that killed 230,000 people. Compare the three disasters. Chernobyl killed 90,000 over 40 years and changed global nuclear policy. Bhopal killed 20,000 and created international chemical safety protocols. Bangkok killed 230,000 in one night and remained classified for 14 years. The disaster with the highest death toll received the least international response because the victims were poor, rural, and politically powerless, and because the Chinese government successfully controlled information. This reveals the fundamental pattern. Disasters that threaten industries or political systems get attention and reform. Disasters that only kill poor people get buried. Let's compare disasters from the past 25 years to see which category continues killing the most people. 2011, Fukushima, Japan. Magnitude 9 earthquake triggers tsunami that knocks out cooling systems at nuclear plant. 3 reactors melt down. Tokyo Electric Power Company initially claims no dangerous radiation released. In reality, they knew within hours that meltdowns were occurring but delayed evacuation orders to avoid panic. 1,800 deaths, mostly from evacuation complications rather than radiation. Multiple investigations find company executives' new safety systems were inadequate years before disaster. No executive serves jail time. Total nuclear deaths 2000 to 2025, approximately 2,000. 2015, Tianjin, China. Chemical warehouse storing improperly stored explosives and toxins explodes. 173 deaths. Investigation reveals warehouse was storing prohibited chemicals far in excess of legal limits. Multiple officials accepted bribes to approve illegal storage. Several officials prosecuted, but warehouse owner fled country. 2020, Beirut, Lebanon. Ammonium nitrate stored improperly in warehouse for 6 years explodes. 218 deaths. Government officials knew about dangerous storage and did nothing for 6 years. Investigation blocked by political interference. No one held accountable. Total chemical deaths 2000 to 2025, approximately 500. 2013, Savar, Bangladesh. Rana Plaza building collapse kills 1,134 garment workers. Massive cracks appeared day before. Engineers declared building unsafe. Building owner threatened workers with firing if they didn't report to work. Building collapsed next morning. Owner convicted of murder, rare exception where owner actually faced consequences. 2015, Brazil. Fundão Dam collapse releases 62 million cubic meters of toxic mining waste. 19 deaths. Dam owner had been warned dam was overfilled and structurally unsound. Continued operations anyway. Company paid settlement equal to 1 month's profit. 2019, Brazil. Brumadinho Dam collapse kills 270. Same company, same type of dam, same ignored warnings. Company executives charged but trials delayed for years. Plus countless mine disasters in China, Turkey, Pakistan. Bridge collapses globally. Building collapses from earthquakes where buildings didn't meet codes. Factory fires where workers were locked inside. Total industrial deaths 2000 to 2025, over 20,000. The pattern over the past quarter century is clear. Industrial disasters kill 10 times more people than nuclear and chemical disasters combined. Yet they receive a fraction of the media attention and regulatory scrutiny. Why? Because nuclear disasters threaten the nuclear industry and create international incidents. Chemical disasters create environmental liability. Industrial disasters kill poor people far from power centers, and death tolls can be hidden, minimized, or blamed on natural disasters, poor construction, or individual negligence rather than systematic regulatory failure. Right now, as you watch this, there are dams operating with known structural defects, buildings occupied despite failing safety inspections, mines operating with inadequate ventilation. All because someone calculated that potential settlements cost less than safety improvements. The answer to which disaster type is deadliest is unambiguous. Let me show you the numbers across 70 years. Nuclear disasters total deaths, Approximately 100,000, mostly from Chernobyl, accumulated over decades. Chemical disasters total deaths, approximately 25,000 to 30,000 with Bhopal accounting for most. Industrial disasters total deaths hundreds of thousands. Bangkeo alone killed 230,000. Add dam failures, building collapses, mine disasters, bridge failures, and the total dwarfs nuclear and chemical combined. Industrial disasters kill more people more frequently, with less media coverage and less regulatory response. And here's why. Governments focus regulatory attention on disasters that create political problems, not disasters that kill the most people. Nuclear disasters get massive attention because they threaten entire industries and create lasting contamination that's undeniable. Chemical disasters get significant attention because environmental damage creates legal liability. Industrial disasters kill poor people in poor countries, and the deaths can be blamed on natural disasters, subcontractors, or individual negligence. The Bangkeo Dam killed 230,000, more deaths than any nuclear or chemical disaster in history, and most people have never heard of it. Imagine if Chernobyl had killed 230,000. It would be taught in every school, memorialized in museums, studied endlessly. But Bangkeo remains obscure because it happened in rural China, because the government classified it for 14 years, and because acknowledging it would require admitting systematic engineering and regulatory failures. Your government is protecting you from the wrong disasters. The one most likely to kill you, structural failure of dams, bridges, buildings, or mines, receives the least regulatory attention because your death won't create political problems for anyone important. You're more likely to die in an industrial disaster than a nuclear or chemical disaster by a factor of 10. But you've been trained to fear radiation and chemicals while ignoring the crumbling infrastructure around you. Now you know which disaster type is deadliest. Nuclear disasters kill thousands over decades. Chemical disasters kill tens of thousands immediately. Industrial disasters kill hundreds of thousands regularly. The disaster you fear most is not the one that will kill you. Chernobyl killed 90,000 over 40 years and changed global nuclear policy. Bhopal killed 20,000 and created international chemical safety standards. Bangkeo killed 230,000 in one night and was hidden for 14 years because the victims had no political power. You can research infrastructure safety in your area. Dam inspection records, building safety violations, and bridge conditions are often public information. You can demand that industrial safety receive the same regulatory attention as nuclear and chemical hazards, which shocked you most. That industrial disasters killed 10 times more than nuclear. That Bangkeo was hidden for 14 years. Or that official death tolls are systematically undercounted. Comment below. Subscribe for data-driven disaster investigations. The disaster you fear is not the one that's killing people. The numbers don't lie. Governments do.